checking in. Hope everybody is doing good. Hope everybody is enjoying their Sabbath day. Ours is over now. We are um, in night half of the day, and we are relaxing. It's pretty late. The kids are in the front room having like a, a sleep in. What do you call it? I guess not a sleepover because it's just them, but they're all sleeping in the front. So I thought I would come out here and do a video that I've been wanting to do for a little while because, of course, we have a lot of, understanding that needs to be, corrected in the community. Because a lot of Hebrews don't know what to do with the book of Galatians, right? The book of Galatians, when it says things like, if you become circumcised, you are cursed from Messiah, or you're not justified. Anyone who seeks to be justified from by the law, you are fallen from favor. You're fallen from grace. All of these different seemingly contradictory concepts coming from Paul. Do you see what I'm saying? Seemingly lawless concepts, right? Um, and when we, you know, approach the book of Galatians, a lot of people will take you to a lot of different places and do a lot of end arounds, try to figure the book of Galatians out, right? But it's very simple, it's very straightforward if you read the text and you understand the text. Um, and so let's just go ahead and get into it. And this time, hallelujah. Good to see you too, Jerry. Shalom, shalom. Trying to get back into it. I've been off for a couple of days, but we're trying to get back into it. Um, so a lot of people, when they approach the book of Galatians, they'll take you here, they'll take you there, but they won't deal necessarily with the topic. They'll tell you that it's another law or, anything like that. And so it kind of is, but you really want to have the text right in front of you for this one. And we're going to go to the book of Galatians this time. And we're going to do it more formally because, this one is a little bit more in depth. So, to begin with, when we first analyze the New Testament, we want to keep a couple verses in mind. And so we always keep this in the back of our mind when we read the text because otherwise we'll be confused and, led down the wrong track, like, 2 billion people, most of the believing population, right? So we keep Matthew 5:17 in our minds. Think not that I come to destroy the law or the prophets. I don't come to destroy the law, but I come to fulfill. This is Yahushua himself telling us that he's not coming to destroy anything that came before, but that he's coming to literally fulfill it to its fullest extent. We talked about the ways that the Bible has been tampered with. Um, and this is really, with this particular terminology, with the way it's worded in English, it can seem a little bit tricky. But, you know, the next few verses will tell you that, okay, what he's talking about. Not one jot or tittle shall fail from the law until all is fulfilled. And so we know all is not fulfilled yet. So we understand the law is still in effect, that we can't live a lawless lifestyle. That's one verse that we want to keep in our back pocket whenever we read Paul. We also want to keep Romans 3:31. Do we make void the law through faith? Elohim forbid. Yea, we establish the law. We also want to give Acts 21, where he takes the vow to keep the commandments. And then we also want to think of Peter chapter 3, verse 15 through 17, where Peter talks about how Paul is misunderstood by people that don't understand the text. And the fashion by which people are misunderstanding Paul is leading them to what the King James Version calls is the error of the wicked. And we know that word wicked is amos, which is the error of the lawless. So if people are interpreting Paul in a fashion that allows them to not keep the law, then they are doing exactly what Peter warned of and are leading themselves to the path of destruction, which is Peter's exact words in Second Peter, right? Okay, so this is, the preamble to, the understanding that we have in the text, right? And so, Galatians, let's get into Galatians. So it says then, O foolish Galatians, who have been, and we're going to jump to chapter 3, because chapter 3 is the part where we get really, really, really deep into, the doctrine. But let's look at chapter 2 as well. It says, knowing that, in verse 16, it says, knowing that a man is not justified by works of the law, but by the faith of Yahushua HaMashiach, even we have believed in Yahushua HaMashiach, that we might be justified by the faith of Mashiach, and not by the works of the law. For by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. It says, but if, while we seek to be justified by Messiah, we ourselves are also found sinners, is therefore Messiah the minister of sin, Elohim? So that one really explains itself in Galatians. We really see right next in the next verse afterwards, if we are found sinners while we seek to be justified by Messiah, then we are, it says, he is that means that Messiah is not the minister of sin. And so he's making the distinction here that, of course, transgression of the law is sin, and we are therefore not justified by the law, but we are justified by having faith in Messiah, right? And so we understand that concept. We understand that the children of Israel were living in the wilderness before reaching the land of promise, and they were keeping the law in the wilderness, most of them to their best ability. We know we had some transgression in Korah. We know we had some transgression, in the very beginning with the making of the golden calf. But for the better part of the entire 40 years, Moses is there, the cloud is there, the presence of Elohim is there, and the fear of Elohim is there. And so the people were keeping the commandments, were keeping the law, keeping Sabbath and doing the things that it took, to be favored in Yah's eyes, except for, a few points in the timeline there. And so there were some murmurings, of course, but for the most part, keeping the law. But what kept them out of the promised land? What kept that generation out of the promised land? Faith, right? So faith is not a new concept in biblical history. Faith is a very old concept that starts with believing that Elohim can save you and bring you into the land of promise, the land that was promised to Abraham, right? So believing that that is okay, or that that is going to happen, believing that no matter what giant is in your way, that Elohim will provide for you, is the way that you enter into the promised land. And no matter what laws you keep, if you do not believe that you will be saved, you will not be saved. It's the same concept today, and by the same namesake, even because it's Yahushua ben Nun who led the children of Israel, the second generation, the first, into the promised land. So let's just get that out of the way. So let's read chapter 3. It says, O foolish Galatians, who hath bewitched you that you should not obey the truth, before whose eyes Yahushua HaMashiach hath been evidently set forth, crucified among you. This only would I learn of you. Receive ye the Spirit by the works of the law, or by the hearing of faith? And we see already a term that is a loaded term there, phrase there, works of the law. Is that the keeping of the law, or is that the doing of the law, or is it a different law? Do you see what I'm saying? It says, are ye so foolish, having begun in the spirit, are you now made perfect by the flesh? Here we go, separating the terms spirit and flesh. And I want you guys to keep that in your mind, because it really, really comes into a real understanding when you go to the next chapter. So there's a huge problem in first century Judaism that people, you know, leave out. Do you see what I'm saying? That people fail to recognize is one of the main problems in first century Jerusalem, first century Judaism, first century religious thought when it comes to Hebraic worship. There's a problem. And the problem is, and I'll tell you now before we get there, because people are going to think that it's just, oh, okay, well, yeah, whatever, right? But it's the literally like Hebraic religious thought. And this is not going to be cool. People are not going to really, I mean, you'll get it, but it's really more than it actually appears to be. So the problem is fake Jews. And I know that's just such a that's like old hat, right? Oh, it's their fault. It's their fault. It's their fault. It's their fault. No, it's our fault because we were the ones that killed Messiah. You know, Matthew 27 lays it all out for us that, you know, let his blood be on us and on our children, is what the Judites said to Messiah in Messiah's face while he's there being judged, right? According to even a heathen, gave our salvation to the heathen, right? So clearly we are to blame. But there is another problem in the first century, which is people who are claiming to be Israelites, but are not, and are the synagogue of Satan. That's a major thread in New Testament understanding, and people do not understand this. There were people out there that were teaching false Judaism. And this is what Paul is talking about. This is what uh, John the Revelator is talking about. This is what, and there's one more instance that I'm forgetting right now. I'm going to beat myself up about it later, but we'll find it as we discuss. And then let me just go ahead and qualify these statements. This is how Galatians is truly interpreted. Let me keep reading. So even as Abraham believed Elohim, and it was accounted to, we're at verse 6 in Galatians chapter 3. It says, even as Abraham believed Elohim, and it was accounted to him for righteousness. It says, know ye therefore that they which are of faith, the same are the children of Abraham. Again, he's comparing a distant past observation of moving and acting according to the belief of Elohim, and not necessarily the keeping of the commandments, which is a point beyond what is going on. Because again, there are false commandments. There are false Hebrews that are spreading false doctrines. And this is a very big problem in the first century. But the larger point is even the actual law is just a means to an end. It's something that you keep in order to be in the presence of Messiah. And being in the presence of Messiah, in the faith of Messiah, automatically means that you have stepped beyond that point of being needed to be shown the law on a consistent basis because you're living in the culture. Does that make sense? Let's keep reading. We'll qualify these statements. It says, okay, let me repeat this here because I think I skipped some parts. It says, hey, I really want to hear this. You are going in and out. Uh-oh. So much to the point I cannot comprehend. I was studying today what you are talking about right now. I am writing a book on love. You're going in and out. Okay, so let me see. Can you guys hear me now? I really hope I'm not going in and out. I may have had my fingers over the microphone there. So what we can do is we're just 15 minutes in here. So can you understand what I'm saying? I might have had my fingers over the microphone. So I'm glad that you were talking about this today because it does. Can you guys hear me? Because it is very important that we understand these instances in the text where it appears that Paul is speaking in a lawless fashion. Looks like we got three people on here. So let's just keep going. Let's read here. And we're going over Galatians. And the reason why we're going over Galatians is because so many of our brethren don't know really how to interpret this text. And it behooves us to look at what the text is saying. So let's just take a look here. We'll start from it was you? Okay. Well, that's good. But I'll tell you, I have my fingers over the microphone there, so I hope that it was you and it didn't get recorded like that. But we'll just go back into where we were then, if I was heard the first time. So again, we're still talking about the congregation of the Galatians, and just to get a heads up of on what is actually going on, Paul has gone throughout Asia Minor and Eastern Europe, and in these Gentile territories, even Magog territories. Do you guys understand that he's going into Magog territory? That's why John Mark didn't want to go with him. He left at Pisidia in, I believe, island of Cyprus before they actually got into the real dangerous area. John Mark wasn't going, right? So he went back. This is not easy territory. This is territory that is dangerous. Lots of barbarian tribes there. There are lots of people there that are, former barbarians and just now understanding the truth, right? And so we've been talking about Scythians on this channel as being the descendants of Magog, and those being the people that go on to rule the world and oppress the Hebrews, right? And so I want to show you guys in Colossians chapter 3, verse 11, it actually talks about the salvation of the Scythians. And so we understand that Paul was putting his life in danger for a concept that is written in the text from way, way back, the salvation of the Gentiles, to the Gentiles, right? We know this. And so this is what Paul is really doing. He is looking at scripture, and because his world was changed by the vision that he had on the way to Damascus, he has dedicated his life to making this prophecy come true. This prophecy of the Messiah in the Gentiles, which brings not just the Gentiles together with Israel, but also the lost 10 tribes of the northern Israel, which is the north, to fulfill this grand prophecy at the end of the world. You see what I'm saying? Paul sees this in the text and is literally walking it out in danger and peril and testing and uh, threats and stonings, and do you see what shipwreck, all sorts of other things, right? And so this is the testimony of a person who is really deep and really knowledgeable in the text. We know from the text that Paul is a Pharisee, but not just any style Pharisee. He's a Pharisee of Pharisees, right? His father was a Pharisee. We know by the text that he was trained under the most educated, the highest school of Hebraic thought in Jerusalem, at the feet of Gamaliel. We know Gamaliel from Acts chapter 5, Acts chapter 4. But Gamaliel is the foremost Israelite teacher of the first century. He was the leader of the Gamaliel school for the Hebrews. And Paul was raised at his feet. So he was, they'd like to say in academia that Paul was a doctorate in religion. So he was very, very, very well versed in the text. And this is why he was so zealous against the people that believed in Messiah, because he's been educated in that way his entire life. And while the high priest and Gamaliel himself are around and steering people away from Messiah and towards violence in Messiah, he was even more zealous than they were, going and actually doing the work and killing believers in Messiah himself until he was stopped, right? Until he was stopped in his tracks. And not only did the world receive one of the greatest apostles, definitely the greatest apostle go forward from that time, because his writings encompass the majority of the New Testament. But also the Israelites who believed in Messiah in that time period were able to rest from this killer who was killing them, right? So two things happened there. One thing, not greater than the other. His historical testimony going forward, but then also that the saints had rest, right? And so here we are, well into his testimony, well into his uh, missionary journeys in Galatia, where he's already established the church, where, and I say church, really congregation, an assembly of believers, where they are already well educated in the text because they're listening to Paul. This is the thing. Paul is so well educated and understands it so well that he just expects people to listen to him. He doesn't he doesn't realize that he still has to prove himself in all these different places. And he ends up having to prove himself, in several different occasions to several different congregations, several different times. We know the book of Corinthians is we know that we have First Corinthians and Second Corinthians. And in First and Second Corinthians, Paul is going off on the Corinthians because of all the crazy stuff that they were doing. But the difference is that in First Corinthians, Paul is writing about a time in the future when he was going to come to them. Do you see what I'm saying? In Second Corinthians, Paul is writing again about time in the future where he's going to come to Corinth and set things straight. And so we get from these two letters that we have from Paul to the Corinthians that these are responses from letters the Corinthians actually wrote to him. It even says in First Corinthians chapter 7, I believe it is, maybe chapter 6. I think it's chapter 7. It says about midway through, now on to the things where you wrote about. So that means that First Corinthians is not actually First Corinthians, that it must be either the second or the third letter that, or even deeper than that Paul has sent to this congregation, because he's writing to them as being a brand new congregation that he has not actually visited yet, that he's sent missionary members to, like Titus, right? Like Timothy. And so established it secondhand, but still established it, and is laying down the law and the method of structure through the letters that he's sending them. And so we see that First Corinthians, even though it's reported to be the first letter to the Corinthians, it's not. It's actually probably the second or even the third letter. And then when we get to Second Corinthians, he's already visited the Corinthians as he said he would in the first letter. And then he's actually visited again a second time, because we get from 2 Corinthians 12 and 13 that he's coming to visit them a third time. So third Corinthians is, or Second Corinthians is actually more like fourth or fifth or maybe even sixth Corinthians, that you've got all those letters that are missing, from the Corinthian correspondence, just by the hints that you're giving in the text, that there is other letters. So I say all that to say that he is very, very active in establishing congregations, maintaining congregations, and then also spiritually checking in to make sure that they're functioning in a righteous way. And this is what the letter to the Galatians is about, that he's already established their church, he's already established their method of worship, and now he is hearing that they are stepping outside of that lane of worship, because these people have come into the area and are teaching something different from what he's already established of them. And so let's read what they were actually saying and what was going on. It says, and I'm going to just go ahead and start with the beginning here. It says, in chapter 3, because chapter 3 is what we get to and we call the Hebrew killer, right? This is Hebrews don't really know what to do with it. It says, O foolish Galatians, who hath bewitched you, that ye should not obey the truth, before whose eyes Yahushua HaMashiach has been evidently set forth, crucified among you. Right? This is saying who came in and taught you. This only would I learn of you. Received ye the Spirit by the word of the law, or by the hearing of faith? Are ye so foolish, having begun in the Spirit, are ye now made perfect by the flesh? Have ye suffered so many things in vain, if it yet be yet in vain? So really pay attention to that controversy, the spirit versus the flesh. It's been advertised as the spirit, being the spirit of Elohim, leading you to all truth, and the flesh being the works of the law. And this is what it seems like, Paul is saying right here, but let's continue to read and qualify that to see if that be so, because it seems like it's not. It seems like the spirit is one thing and the flesh is another thing, not the law, but a people group. I know it sounds crazy. Let me show you. It says, he therefore that ministereth to you the Spirit and worketh miracles among you, doeth he it by the works of the law, or by the hearing of faith? And this is true. We just talked about that the children were saved going into the promised land because they believed that they could destroy the giants, not because that they were keeping the Sabbath, you guys. They were keeping the Sabbath, well, not to say that they weren't, but those who were keeping the Sabbath and did not believe that they could slay the giants were destroyed in the wilderness. Those that could in the next generation are the ones that made it in, those who kept the law and had the testimony. See what I'm saying? Yeah, had kept the law and had the faith of Yahusha. It says, even as Abraham believed Elohim, it was accounted to him for righteousness. You see, he's given another ancient example of faith and works together. It says, know ye therefore that they which are of faith, the same are the children of Abraham. And the scripture foreseeing that he would justify the heathen through faith, preaching before the gospel to Abraham, saying, in thee shall all nations be blessed. Again, he is going backwards and looking at the prophecy to the Gentiles. He's not looking necessarily at the Gog Magog prophecy as an end of the world for all Gentiles. He's looking at the Isaiah 6 style prophecy where the Gentiles will be bringing the children of Israel into the promised land, or the Isaiah 56, the strangers that cleave to the covenant, or the Isaiah 14, that the Gentiles will be given unto the Israelites, and they will possess them in the land for servants and handmaids, right? And they will cleave unto Jacob. I believe that's in Isaiah 14. But these are the things, they will be a light to the Gentiles. Do you see what I'm saying? This is in Isaiah. We just read it today, and I can't remember where it is now. But these are the things that Paul is reading. And so he has literally changed his life, turned himself around to make this happen. And the instructions that he's given to the Galatians are being questioned. So let's continue to read. It says, so then they which be of faith are blessed with faithful Abraham. For as many as are of the works of the law are under the curse. For it is written, cursed is everyone that continueth not in all things which are written in the book of the law to do them. Okay, so here is a wild part to say if you're keeping the law, then you are cursed. But he's making a double point here, and we'll come back to that point because, again, you're keeping the law, and if you're keeping it falsely, then you're cursed therein. Do you see what I'm saying? If you're not keeping the law, but you believe you're keeping the law, then you're still cursed because in the law, it says, cursed is everyone that doesn't keep the law. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay. It says, but that no man is justified by the law in the sight of Elohim, it is evident for the just shall live by faith. Again, in the book of Habakkuk. And the law is not faith, but the man that doeth them shall live in them. And again, is the law of faith. It's not of faith. The law is based on sin. Remember, the law was added because of sin to have something to do with sin. The law itself is a structure for constitutional growth, but also it is a set of commandments in order to figure out what to do about sin, in order to have bloodshed because sin is in the community. because Elohim is that the children of Israel will sin. He is placed in the law contingency plans in order to, if they do sin, to be able to be covered. It's why we have a day of atonement, you guys. This is an atonement for the sins of Israel for that year and the sins of the priest and to cover the priest's family. This is the day that's coming up in about 2 weeks or so, right? Maybe 3 weeks. We're around there. So 10 days from the first, the moon's around here somewhere. We'll see where that is. It's soon. So this is why we have that particular feast day. This is why we have the sacrifice. This is why we have the Levite system, the priest system. This is the reason for the law. So that means the law is not about faith, right? That's why completing the law in the wilderness was not enough to bring the children of Israel into the promised land. They're two different things, right? And people at that time were believing that they were one. And now, is it the same now as it was then? It's not. And we'll have to get to that too, because the law has been worked out in this generation. And now we have to teach it because we never knew it growing up. Do you see what I'm saying? And there's no community there to support us in correct law keeping. So now we have to dig and study to show ourselves approved in the law because we fought against it our whole life. But that's another conversation. So let's continue here. It says, Messiah has redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone that hangeth on a tree. And so again, we see a reference here that references right up to the curse day. And we know we have that brother that was hung or appears to be hung in North Carolina, which is a reference to the style of curse that we're under now. Does that make sense? So what what Paul is saying here is that we don't have to worry if we're in Messiah that we're keeping the law correctly or incorrectly because we are following Messiah and Messiah is keeping the law correctly. If we have the ensample of Messiah and we follow him, we understand that we won't need to be in the law every day, all day. Do you see what I'm saying? We go over the law on Shabbat. We, read with our families in the synagogues. I'm speaking from a first century perspective. But as a Gentile, if you're in the congregation of faith, you are all checking each other, judging each other, making sure everyone's doing the right thing, making sure you have the example of the Messiah, the life of the Messiah to go by. And therefore, you're not living in sin. You've rejected fornication. You've rejected lies and adultery. You've rejected all of these different things. And if you return to them, then you are walking outside of the faith of the Messiah. And so let's get deeper into it here. It says Messiah has redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone that hangeth on a tree. And so he is again referencing the actual law with the Messiah too. And so he's using the curse of the person that is hung from a tree overnight as an example for how our sins are forgiven by Messiah, who was sinless, being made a curse for us, right? It says that the blessing of Abraham might come on the Gentiles through Yahushua HaMashiach, that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. You guys don't recognize how wicked that these Gentiles were. They were living in fornication. They were getting every sort of level of lasciviousness and concupiscence that you can ever imagine. It was a lawless land back in the day, and recognizing that they had been delivered from that extreme lawlessness, from that hopelessness, was a miracle in itself. And Paul is witnessing, the children of the Gentiles actually coming into the faith and recognizing the truth in the scriptures. And it's all through Messiah. and this was prophesied to happen. Paul is making it happen too, and is trying to counteract some false doctrines. And I've got to get there to show you guys, and we're still kind of a long way away. It says, "Brethren, I speak after the manner of men, though it be but a man's covenant. Yet if it be confirmed, no man disannulleth or addeth thereto. Now Abraham and his seed, now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He saith not, and to seeds as if many, but as of one, and to thy seed, which is Mashiach. And this I say, that the covenant that was confirmed before of Elohim in Messiah, the law, which was 430 years after, cannot disannul, that it should make the promise of none effect. For the inheritance be of the law, it is no more of promise, but Elohim gave it to Abraham by promise. So again, the law is after Abraham. So nothing that the law says can disannul anything that belongs to Abraham. And the seed of Abraham is Messiah. Do you see what I'm saying? And Messiah is promised to all nations. And so this inheritance is offered to all nations, but at this time only. And just because the law is there and there is what is perceived to be a law against them doesn't mean that the law going back for or the promise going back before that is disannulled by the law. He's just explaining that nothing can take your promise in Messiah away, even if these guys try to show you some law that does that, which is probably something that they did. So it says, "Wherefore then serveth the law? It was added because of transgressions, till the seed should come to whom the promise was made, and it was ordained by angels in the hand of a mediator." Again, transgressions, sins, right? This is why the law was added. It was added to purify the people, not because there was a need for a written law to be written down on tablets of stone. It was because of sin. The law is there because of sin, and the Messiah is there to remove sin from your body in his sacrifice of himself, not so that you can live in sin, but so that you can be pure enough to be in the presence of Elohim, and to be able to be grafted into the family of Israel, that your sins can be wiped out so that you can be a part of the family. It's like a baptism, right? It's a joining in and join in through this one act. Okay, it says, we're in verse 20. It says, "Now a mediator is not a mediator of one, but Elohim is one." Of course, we are talking about two parties, you and Elohim, and the mediator between them is Messiah. But, mediator doesn't usually mediate by himself or with one party, he mediates with three. And so Elohim is one, and even though Messiah is with Elohim, he is a mediator, and Elohim is one. Does that make sense? It says, "Is the law then against the promises of Elohim? Elohim forbid. For if there had been a law given which could have given life, verily righteousness should have come by the law. But the scripture have concluded all under sin, that the promise by faith of Yahushua HaMashiach might be given to them that believe." When it says all are under sin, what it means is that the children of Israel were out of Israel because of their sin, right? They were sent, to distant lands by the Assyrian Empire, in 720 BC, right? So Israel has fallen under sin and was divorced. Their treacherous sister Judah saw them and saw all these things, and then the same thing happened to them. In Jeremiah chapter 3, it says, "I've written her a bill of divorcement," right? So Judah was also cut off, and to add insult to injury, Judah then goes and kills the Messiah. And so now Judah is under sin. They don't have anything to purge their sin because they've killed the Messiah. Even though that particular death is what purges their sin, they are now found guilty as well, right? And so the Gentiles also, we know that they were found under sin well before Israel was, way back in, Japheth and Ham's time. But those sons decided that they were going to be wicked right away, and started the rejection of Elohim, very early stage, making them understand, but for a very, very long time, much longer time than the Israelites. So all people are under sin, even Judah now, because Judah does not have any excuse for killing its own Messiah. They are found guilty, found under sin. All right, it says, but before faith came, we were kept under the law, shut up unto the faith which should afterwards be revealed. Wherefore the law was our schoolmaster to bring us unto Messiah, that we might be justified by faith. It says, if the law was after Abraham, then how did Abraham obey the commandments, statutes, and laws in charge? Genesis 26. Because in the Noetic covenant, there were a few laws that you wouldn't be able to shed blood, that you would, do just weights and balances, and all these different things like that. So there were a few laws that were in place. We know that Abraham knew how to marry. We knew that Abraham knew who he could and couldn't marry. We knew that there were some things that Abraham knew that were given to him. If you are familiar with the book of Jasher, and I believe it's Jasher and not Jubilees, it talks about how Abraham, first came into the understanding of faith. And I think we've talked about this before, where he sat out one night and looked at the sun and said, well, sun, people worship the sun, so let me go ahead and give praise to the sun. But he found that it set, and then the moon rose. He said, okay, well, if the sun sets and the moon rises, then the moon must be equally powerful. Let me go ahead and give my praise to it too. But then the moon is setting, he says, okay, well, the sun and the moon are both seemingly working together because one is coming when the other one is leaving. And the stars are also moving in kind of in alignment with them, and it all works to my benefit. Do you see what I'm saying? Abraham was faithful enough to recognize that in that, and this is the wild part, is that we know of Abraham as the actual first scientist, right? In the modern era, or in the era that comes after the flood, that he is literally the first scientist, one of the only ones that through observation was able to prove conclusively that Elohim was beyond the sun, beyond the moon, and beyond the stars, just by looking at the movements of the heavens and how that they were aligned in certain ways that benefited mankind, and saying that someone who is greater than myself created the sun, the moon, and the stars for me to be able to look at. So it is to that person I give my praise and honor. And then this is when Elohim comes to Abraham and then is, guiding him and throughout his life. And we know that that entity that is guiding Abraham through his life, in Genesis 47, 48, that entity is Messiah. And so in the instances when the entity shows himself to Abraham, we know that there are certain laws and statutes that Abraham is doing, especially the rituals and rules of the covenant, where they slay the bull in half and all of these different rites that Abraham, because Abraham knows how to offer a sacrifice. These are all things that Abraham would have known from his interactions with Elohim. This is not an interaction that's written down even. This is the laws that are given to Abraham directly, the understanding that's given to Abraham directly, that he passes on to Isaac, and that he then passes to Jacob, and are a part of the culture of then now Israel going forth from that time. So there are, rules and understandings that are understood among, the chosen people that are not understood by the rest of the world. And this is, part of what Paul is talking about. He goes into in Romans that the Gentiles were, hopeless, that they had no hope of salvation, that there was nothing that they could do, that they were a drop in the bucket. But now comes faith, and in faith, in the faith of Yahusha, you now have access to not only the law and not only righteousness, but also everlasting life. And that those things, that the law and the righteousness were the means by which that you make it to everlasting life through Yahushua HaMashiach and for Elohim Yah, the Elohim of Yahweh. If that makes sense. It says, okay. And so let's continue to read. And I want to get to a point here because this is what breaks Galatians down. He's what Paul is doing is he's making the point for lifestyle and not law. If lifestyle is the more important thing, and law is how your lifestyle is the parameters of your lifestyle, then you just live your lifestyle within these parameters and you don't have to worry about the parameters because you're living lifestyle and the parameters are there. You don't have to read every time you go out and drive a car. It's not necessary that you read the rules of the road, right? Once you're living the lifestyle and once you understand the lifestyle, and let's just say you have a co-pilot, right? Let's say you got a driving teacher that's right next to you. You don't have to worry about looking at the rule book to make sure that your co-pilot is telling you the right thing, right? Now, if let's just say that you do, or somebody is in your ear saying you might want to read that book, or he interprets it this way, but I interpret these rules to being this, and we've been doing this, and we're of the seed of Abraham, or we are descendants of such and such, and we are Hebrews, we are apostles, which is what the Corinthians were listening to, the word of rogue apostles, right? Then the co-pilot may look at you and say, who has bewitched you from the truth? He may say, ye did run well, ye did drive well. And this is the responsibility of Paul, is that he's looking up, and all of these places where he founded that were already doing the right thing are now listening to these people that are leading them down Pharisaic or even different paths. And so let's get to that. It says, all right. It says, but after that faith has come, we are no longer under a schoolmaster. And so people have interpreted that to mean that, okay, you are not under the law, you're under grace, right? And so people have interpreted that as meaning that you can sin. That's not what that means. It says you are not under the law, you are under favor. In the wilderness, when Yahusha was literally traveling with the Israelites, like we talked about before, there were Israelites that were breaking laws. There were Israelites that were keeping laws. Let's just say Aaron there. Aaron made an idol before before Moses could come down with the testimony to say, "Do not bow to idols." Do you see what I'm saying? So they knew that's not what they were supposed to be doing in the very beginning, right? That's something that Abraham would have taught them, because what Abraham's father Terah was an idol maker, and I know you guys have heard the story about when he recognized who Elohim was, and then he looked up and saw what his father was doing. So he's got these idols set up in this house for the king, right? And he sets up a situation to where he goes in and knocks over the idols, except for one, I believe. And don't let me get this story confused. If you guys know the story better than me, please correct me. And they come to him and say, why did you knock over these idols? And he said, I didn't knock over all of them. This is the big one that did it. And he said, oh, that's just an idol made of stone, made of wood. He can't knock over these other idols. And he said, then why do you worship him then? Why do you worship him as if he can? And do you see, this ancient understanding is clear and goes forward all the way down and is a law, an unwritten law that Aaron knows he's not supposed to do. Do you see what I'm saying? He knows he's not supposed to do it because when he comes off the mountain and Moses said, what's going on? He says, the people is what's going on. The people made me do it, right? And so this was one of those unwritten rules that was a rule, right? It was a real obvious one, right? And so when we get to uh, okay, What the purpose of the law is that it actually brings us to a point. It brings us to life in the Messiah. So let's continue reading here. It says, "For ye are all children of Elohim by faith in Yahusha." Oh, I'm sorry, Messiah Yahusha. For as many of you as have been baptized into Messiah have put on Messiah. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female, for ye are all one in Mashiach Yahusha. And if ye be Mashiach, you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. He's not just talking, y'all. Yep. I mean, people, Hebrews want to look at this and say, no, they not. This is my inheritance. And I mean, you can't blame us because we haven't known what our inheritance was. We haven't known who we are. And according to prophecy, this is another Paul prophecy in Romans 11, that we would be jealous of that inheritance and want it back. And we do now. Do you see what I'm saying? And not only do we want it back, we're taking it back. And now we say, y'all can't have it, Edom. Y'all can't have it, Africa. You can't have it, nobody else. It's ours. And that's wrong too, because clearly in the text it says in Ezekiel 47 that the members of the Gentiles who cleave to the commandments and the covenant will be given an inheritance with whatever tribe they sojourn with. So if you've got a family of Gentiles, a family of Magogites that are living in Judah and are following the commandments, believing in Messiah, and they're, in with you, then they will be given an inheritance with you. Do you see what I'm saying? People that came in at the end of the day that are getting the same the same work at the end of the day that the people that were there at the beginning. Hey, that's not fair. They just got here. Uh-uh. Oh foolish man, oh vain man. No, they deserve salvation just like you do. Just because they came in late don't mean that they don't deserve their reward. What? Don't get your reward taken because you want to keep some from theirs. You see what I'm saying? This is what Paul is trying to explain to the Galatians. That these people, whoever they are coming around, no matter who they say they are, can't keep you from the promise. And Abraham was promised in you too through Messiah. This is important because it's the prophecy. You see what I'm saying? Isaiah 56, let not the stranger say that I have forsaken him. Let him not say I'm a dry tree. For the stranger that cleaves to my covenants and to my Sabbath, even he shall be called, even he shall have a name better than sons and daughters. It's Isaiah 56. Do you see what I'm saying? So the prophecy to the Gentiles is an important one, right? And Paul's trying to make this happen. And we as Israelites today need to make this happen too, even though we come from a point of view that is well below Paul's perspective, because we don't even know that we're Benjamites. We don't even know that we're Judites or anything. We don't know what tribe that we're from at all. So we come from a perspective of us learning, the culture and then the culture being around us too. So we have no room, to say anything. Us being under sin is really equal in all of these parts. It's really prophecy that comes to play here in this era. Even though we're Hebrews and the prophecy is to us, for us, and then also against us, we have to recognize that anybody that is here with us is here with us. And that speaks to the Gentiles too, because you do have to be here with us. You can't just say, okay, well, I'm just going to go out and start my own congregation, and we're not going to worry about who the Jews are or any of that, because the actual uh, worship involves the Jewish people. It says salvation is of the Jews, and John chapter 4, verse 21. You see what I'm saying? So let's read. Let's actually get to it. It says, and if ye be messiahs, then ye are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. This is what we just talked about. Let's get to chapter 4. Now, chapter 4 lays it on the line for you guys to recognize, right? And so what's going on here is you have some people that are not Israelites that are coming in and, giving false prophecy to Paul. And this is why Paul is, or false prophecy, false laws to the Galatians. This is why Paul has to speak in the way that he speaks, and he has to strongly rebuke them and then give them a little history lesson too. You see what I'm saying? So let's qualify this. It says, "Now I say that an heir is as long as he is a child, differeth nothing from a servant, though he be Lord of all." You got recognize that right there. It's a very important point that as a child, you don't have anything more than the servants have, but until you become a man, then you differentiate between who is master and who is servant. It says, "But is under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the Father. Even so, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of this world." It says, "But when the fullness of the time was come, Elohim sent his son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. And because ye are sons, Elohim has sent forth the spirit of his son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father." So we are made under law, according to the elements of the world, is what he's saying right here. Do you see what I'm saying? But when we come into adoption, we are a whole different creature. Not that we are outside of the law, no longer under the law, but we are abiding in it. Do you understand what I mean? It says, it says, "Wherefore thou art no more a servant, but a son. And if a son, then an heir of Elohim through Messiah." This is in chapter 4. It says, "Howbeit then, when ye knew not Elohim, ye did service unto them which by nature are no Elohim." You see what I'm saying? He's talking to the Gentiles here. He's talking about pagan worship. It says, "But now after that ye have known Elohim, or rather are known of Elohim, how turn ye again to the weak and beggarly elements, whereunto ye desire again to be in bondage?" It says, "Ye observe days and months and times and years. I am afraid of you, lest I have bestowed upon you labor in vain." Okay, it says, "Ye observe days and months and times and years." And so this is something that they were doing that was outside of the commandments, that somebody was teaching them to celebrate in these other different ways than what he's taught. And now we are not saying here that Paul is teaching against keeping the Passover right here, because that they'll tell you. But if you go to 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 7, he's telling the Corinthians, "Let us keep feast." It says clearly, "Let us keep the feast, not with the old leaven of malice and jealousy," I think, "but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth." So he's telling the Corinthians, who are heathens, most of them, to keep the Passover. So he can't be telling them here, why you keeping the Passover? So they have been doing something different, right? And so let's keep looking. It says, "Brethren, I beseech you, be as I am, for I am as ye are. Ye have not injured me at all." It says, "Know that how through infirmity of the flesh I preached the gospel unto you at the first." He's probably talking about the thorn in his side. "And my temptation, which was in my flesh, ye despised not, nor rejected, but received me as an angel of Elohim, even as Mashiach Yahusha. Where is then the blessedness ye spake of? For I bear you record that if it had been possible, you would have plucked out your own eyes and have given them to me." So again, this is something that the Galatians have written to him. He says, "Where is then the blessedness ye spake of?" So that means that they said something to him, letter that we don't have. You guys have to understand that anytime you're reading Paul, you're usually reading a response letter, and the people that are writing the letters have written them, and you don't have the accusations or the questions that they have that were concerning, the things that Paul is saying. So there's some point that Paul is referring to right here that the Galatians have told them that had to do with blessedness, that is concerning their opinion of him, because when they received him at first as they would have received the Messiah and would have done anything for him. And now he's saying, okay, has that changed? Were you wrong initially? Do you see what I'm saying? So let's look again here. It says, "Am I therefore become your enemy because I tell you?" This is, qualifying. It says, they zealously affect you, but not well. They would exclude you that ye might affect them. But it's good to be zealously affected, always in a good thing, and not only when I am present with you. And so this is a major theme in Pauline writing, that people have talked against Paul while he is gone. Do you see what I'm saying? They won't speak about him when he's there. You have to read Second Corinthians. It was really deeply into this. It says, tell me, ye that, it says, I desire to be present with you now and to change my voice, for I stand in doubt of. He's again, getting ready to rebuke the Galatians. It says, tell me, ye that desire to be under the law, do ye not hear the law? Do you see what I'm saying? So this is the differentiation that he's preparing to make. And you guys, I want you guys to pay close attention to this part, because we're going to go back over this again in other books, in other letters. We're going to see the same thing. So I'm just going to show you. And it's going to be wild, you guys. So if you have missed the first hour, this is what we're trying to get to. This is why people don't understand Galatians, because they're only reading Galatians chapter 3 and then closing the book and saying, see, you're accursed if you keep that law. Figure out what Paul is talking about, you guys. So let's start. We're in Galatians chapter 4, verse 22, and we've actually been talking this whole time to get to this point. So this is the point that we need to pay close attention to, starting at verse 22. It says, for it is written that Abraham had two sons, the one by a bondmaid and the other by a free woman. But he who was of the bondwoman born after the flesh, but he of the free woman was by promise. So check this out. You're talking about two people here. Who are they talking about? Abraham's two sons, right? Isaac and Ishmael. And the difference between them, two nations, right? Two nations and two covenants. So let's take a look. It says, which things are an allegory. Now, this is a story. So they are representative of something that exists now. It says, for these are two covenants, the one from the Mount Sinai, with which gendereth to bondage, which is Hagar. It says Agar in the King James Version, but remember in these translations, it speaks to the talking, so they don't have the H sound. So that's Hagar. It says, for this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. Now, you guys have to remember that the Mount Sinai that is of the Bible is not in Arabia. It's deep, it's further up. Arabia is much deeper in. So they're talking about a different Mount Sinai, right? They're talking about a Mount Sinai that doesn't have to do with the commandments. What people are saying is that Moses at Mount Sinai received the commandments, and that's what's putting people in bondage, like Hagar was a bondwoman. Don't believe that. He's talking about a people group here. He's talking about the people that descended from Ishmael. Do you understand? He's talking about the descendants of Ishmael, which are speaking the Hebrew history as if they, being sons of Abraham, have authority. Do you see what I mean? Are they Hebrews? Yes, I am too. Are they sons of Abraham? I am too. Are they Israelites? I am too. You see what I'm saying? Second Corinthians. This is the problem of the text in the first century, is that there were a lot of people out there claiming the heritage and pretending to be the chosen seed, and giving false prophecy and false doctrine as well. Let's keep reading. That's not going to be a popular interpretation, the correct one. Let's look. It says, but he who was after the bondwoman was born after the flesh. Now pay attention. He who was the bondwoman was born after the flesh. And so this is the thing. Paul's speaking in coded language here, because you'll see here in a minute. Keep thinking about the spirit and the flesh, the spirit and the flesh. These are two different people groups, y'all. I'll show you. It says, it says, which things are an allegory, for these two are two covenants. The one from Mount Sinai was genderous to bondage, which is Hagar. And so this is Mount Sinai in Arabia, where Hagar ended up developing the Ishmaelites. And now let's look in verse 25 because it say it better than I can. It says, "For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and answereth to Jerusalem, which now is and is in bondage with her children." You guys, if you're here, if you're listening right now, you need to box verse 25, because it's this verse that brings everything into perspective. Now, look, it says, "For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and answereth to Jerusalem." So, check this out. It said, this Hagar, this person from Mount Sinai in Arabia, this Hagar is from Mount Sinai in Arabia. But there's one thing about her that you got to know about these Hagarites from Mount Sinai. They answer to Jerusalem. Do you guys do you guys hear me? These Hagarites from Mount Sinai answer to Jerusalem, which means when you say, "Hey Jerusalem," they say, "Here I am." But they're not Jerusalem. They're Hagarites from Mount Sinai in Arabia. But they are pretending to be of Jerusalem. And now check this out. Look what else he says in the latter half of that passage. It says, "And answereth to Jerusalem, which now is and is in bondage with her children." So he's actually saying that Jerusalem is in bondage to Hagarites who are pretending to be from Jerusalem. He said, "The Jerusalem which now is in bondage with her children." So the people that are are answering to Jerusalem also have actual Jerusalem in bondage in Jerusalem. Do you see what I'm saying? We know that the leaders of thought in Jerusalem at one point in time were foreigners, whether they were Edomites or Ishmaelites or either of those things, right? We know that one case it says we have never been we are sons of Abraham and have been in bondage to no man. There's only one group of sons of Abraham which were never in bondage, and that would be the Ishmaelites. Do you see what I'm saying? The Ishmaelites had no line of bondage to anyone. Do you see what I mean? This is the group that Yahusha comes in contact with, while he's walking around Jerusalem. People that said that they were in bondage to no man. But wait a second. All your ancestors, if you were from Jerusalem, if you're from the Isaac line of Abraham, then you definitely would have been in bondage a couple different times. And so we see that there's this wild group of people that are around telling people this wild doctrine and influencing people in these wild ways, right? And so let's keep reading here. It says, "But Jerusalem, which is above, is free, which is the mother of us all. For it is written, Rejoice, thou barren that bearest not. Break forth and cry, thou that travailest not. For the desolate hath many more children than she which hath an husband. Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are the children of promise." So he's connecting the Galatians with himself as being of children of promise because they were following him, because they were following Messiah, because they weren't following this false doctrine with these false observations and all of these other things that he's saying that will destroy you. Not the law, not the actual law, but these works of the law, these strange doctrines that have been inserted into the Galatian mindset that Paul is aware of, pre-aware of, specifically aware of through Pharisaism, through the understanding of the Sadducees, and through all this other milieu of wild doctrine that he's encountered in his studies. Do you see what I'm saying? So let's keep looking. It says, "But as he that was born after the flesh persecuted him that was born after the spirit, even so it is now." He is telling the history of these people here, these particular group of Ishmaelites that have always been after the Israelites. Do you understand what I mean? They have persecuted the Israelites through this entire time and given these Galatians a history lesson about the people who they just let in their gates and who are influencing them against Paul. This is what's happening in Galatians. He's not pronouncing a judgment against keeping the law. He's trying to tell you who it was that you brought into your gates, O ye foolish Galatians. It says, "You who bewitched you?" I'm going to tell you who bewitched you. It was those Ishmaelites, those descendants of Hagar. They're from Mount Sinai. They're pretending to be Jerusalem. But guess what? They've got us in bondage now. And so what do you do with those people? You cast out the bondwoman, right? And this is the metaphor that he's making. He's making the metaphor of what actually Abraham did or what Sarah did. Do you see what I'm saying? And this is what he's telling them to do with the doctrine. So let's read. It says, um, it says, but as he that was born after the flesh persecuted him that was born after the spirit, even so it is now. Remember that flesh spirit again? Hasn't that been a very poignant, pointed theme in Pauline writing? So some of it is based on actual spiritual people and fleshly people, as in groups, right? And particularly, he's talking about now Isaac and Ishmael. And we'll prove that. We'll go to Romans chapter 9. He says the same thing. And so it says, nevertheless, what saith the scripture? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman will not be heir with the son of the free woman. So then, brethren, we are not the children of the bondwoman, but of the free. He's telling them to cast out that false doctrine. Cast out the doctrine of the bondwoman. Do you see what I'm saying? He's telling you who these people are, and the Galatians would not know the history as well as he did. And so he would know who those people are, and he'd be able to identify their false doctrine very quickly. Remember in the book of Revelation, Revelation chapter 2:9, Revelation chapter 3:9, I know you of the synagogue of Satan who pretend to be Jews and are not. Or it says, I know you. I mean, I got the book right here. Let's just go. I try to do all this by memory, but sometimes I fall short. We can just read it. These are ones that I should have memorized because they're so easy. It says, I know thy works. This is 2:9. I know thy works in tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich. And I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. So he says that to a church that this one was Smyrna. And so there were people in Smyrna that were pretending to be Jews, but were not, and were the synagogue of Satan. And it appears that the people in Smyrna were influenced by those people in a specific way. And John the Revelator is writing to them about these people. Does that sound familiar? Isn't that what Paul is doing with Galatians? He is actually identifying these people who are pretending to be Jews and are not, but are actually Hagarites. They're actually Hagarites from Mount Sinai. They're actually Ishmaelites from Arabia. They're not Jerusalem, even though they when you say, hey, Jerusalem, they will respond. People have taken that Mount Sinai in Arabia to mean the Ten Commandments, and you should cast out the Ten Commandments which are keeping you in bondage when it's the Ten Commandments that are giving you life. This is not what Paul is talking about, you guys. And this is why Peter says, hey, you need to get it together when you're reading Paul. If you're trying to read him in some sort of lawless fashion, then you don't know the scripture, and you need to go back and take a second look. Because if you do that, then you're leading yourself down the path of destruction. No matter what you hear him say, you need to go back and take another look, because he's well educated in the text. He's well given the spirit, and he knows what he's talking about. It's you that don't know. Do you see what I'm saying? So let's continue to look. In chapter 3, he says the same thing to the church of Philadelphia. These are two places that are in Gentile lands that would be around the same areas that Paul would be in. And guess what? They're large Hebraic congregations that are in all of the far-flung places in Eastern Europe and in Asia Minor and all of these different places in Asia. Do you see what I'm saying? All of these places in Greece and in Macedonia and all far flung places where there are Hebrew congregations and Gentiles that are seeing Hebraic people. Don't follow, these wild groups. Do you see what I'm saying? Not that the Hebraic people that were there were of some wild group. Most of them were, uh, diasporans that had come from, the Roman captivity from an early stage and may have been there already for 100, maybe 150 years. That doesn't mean that they're Ishmaelites or anything like that, but there are random groups that appear to be traveling through these areas also that would be pretending to be Israelites. This is what John is saying right here. It says, "Behold, in chapter 3, verse 9 in Revelation, behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before thy feet, and to know that I have loved thee." So this was a problem. The false Jews was a problem. Let's just go down the list. The false Jews were a problem in Galatia. The false Jews were a problem in Smyrna. What didn't we say, Smyrna? Then the false Jews were a problem in Philadelphia. Do you guys understand that a major issue in the first century was these people walking around claiming to be sons of Abraham? These people walking around claiming to be Hebrews and having this, the oracles of Elohim, but are giving false doctrine, false testimony? We know that's the case today. Now, are these Ashkenazim of today, the synagogue of Satan of today, is that the same group of people? No, it's not the same group of people. It's a different set of false Jews. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so there's many, by the first century, different groups of false Jews. We know that there was a Persian group of false Jews because of the book of Esther, chapter 8. And I think there's verse 17, when of Haman is found out, the plot against the Jews was found out, and the Jews got a chance to, exact revenge on all of their enemies in all the land of Persia because of Esther the queen and because of her plea for her people to the king. And he decrees when he finds out, the treachery of Haman, that all all the Jews and all the far outflung lands of the 108 provinces of Persia had an opportunity to exact revenge on their enemies. And in that time, some of those enemies were like, wait a second, we don't want to be killed. We'll convert to Judaism. And some of them stayed that way. According to Esther, it says some people made themselves Jews, which means circumcised themselves. So you have a group of false Jews there. Not to say that they were spreading false doctrine, but these are Persians. And another word for Persia is Fares, or Fars, or Farsi, or Pharisee. Do you guys hear that? We know that the Pharisees were a group that emerged in the period between, Esther and Matthew, right? And so in that time frame, there were a lot of Persian Pharisee Jews, right? So it's not a giant leap to say that this Pharisaic doctrine came from Persia itself, because it's called Persia, that they called themselves Persia. That's the word. Pharisee is the same word as Persia. The Pei and the Phe are the same letter in Hebrew. When you see Farsi, people speak Farsi, that's literally the same word as Persia. And so Pharisee is also the same word. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's a huge connection to this group of false Jews that were Persian. And now that's one group. Another group is the Edomites, right? Who were conquered by Judah Maccabea in the 2nd century BC and forced to convert as well, to circumcise, and live as Jews after that time as well. And we're not saying that these particular Jews that they're talking about here are the Edomites either, because from what we Edomites, they were really zealous of the law and were, really fighters with the Israelites in a lot of different ways, and looked like the Israelites too. And this is why we reject the modern notion of the Edomite being the white man and all that, because we know that in the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD, that the Edomites, joined in with the Jews and were spread into captivity with the Jews as one nation, right? And so that's not that group of fake Jews either. So there are other groups of fake Jews that are besides those two that are in Smyrna, in Philadelphia, in Galatia, and these particular ones in Galatia are from the seed of Hagar, from the seed of Ishmael, and they had a very strong authority in Jerusalem. And this Paul explaining to the Galatians who these people are, why you shouldn't be circumcised by them, why you shouldn't follow their works of the law, and why you should continue in the commandments as he gave them to you. This is the essence of Galatians. Anything beyond that, is added interpretation from a Christian perspective. So if anybody tries to quote Galatians 3 to you or Galatians 2 to you in any form or any fashion whatsoever, you jump to the next chapter and show them exactly what this scripture is talking about. And then you jump to the book of Revelation and show them two more times where a different apostle is saying the same thing about people or about certain groups of people in these Gentile lands that are not far away from each other. Do you understand what I'm saying? That are Gentile lands where people are doing the same things to the people at Smyrna and to the people at Philadelphia that they're doing to the Galatians. These false group of Jews that are going around pretending to have men, but actually being members of a synagogue devoted to Satan. And we understand that this to be a real thing because here in the 21st century AD, we have a whole huge genocidal maniac group of people doing the same thing. And they're a whole group of people. And we know that they're Magogites, which if you call and say, hey, Jerusalem, they'll say, what up, though? That's what's up. If you say, hey, Jerusalem, they'll say, that's us. But they're actually Magogites, right? And it's provable that they're Magogites, right? So we understand that this is a whole new and different group from the ancient groups, but the ancient groups were there too, and they were really the same thing. Let's go to Philippians chapter 3 real quick so I can show this to you. Philippians chapter 3 says the same thing, and after this we'll go to another different, I'll show you some more of the same account as, this is a huge, huge, huge problem. So again, we're talking about these groups of people that are going around claiming to be apostles, claiming to be Hebrews, claiming to be Israelite, but are actually other different things. It says in Philippians chapter 3, verse 1, it says, finally, my brethren, rejoice in Yah. To write the same things to me is indeed not grievous, but for you is safe. He's saying that I'm going to explain to you things that may be dangerous, but don't worry about it. It's safe. It says, beware of dogs, beware of evil workers, beware of the concision, you guys. What does concision mean, you guys? The letter to the Philippians. This is, and I'm getting ready to run out of batteries here, so I'm going to have to speed this up. This is the letter to the Philippians. So you have to understand that he's talking about dogs. When he says the word dog, it's always a reference to Gentiles. Do you understand what I mean? You remember the Syro-Phoenician woman and what Yahushua said to the Syro-Phoenician woman that was, calling after him, after Yahushua to save her daughter, to expel the demon from her daughter. Yahushua turns and says to her, gifts are for the children. Why would you take the food off the children's plate? And the woman looks back to him and says, I'm a dog. Don't the dogs eat after? She doesn't say I'm a dog, but she says, don't the dogs eat after the plate of the children? Messiah actually is the one that calls her a dog. He says, should we take the children's food and feed it to the dogs? Is his exact words. I think this is Matthew 15, somewhere in there. And she says, don't the dogs eat from the scraps at the master's table? And he said to her, for this saying, your daughter's healed, right? So you understand what time it is. But the point that I'm making there is that when Hebrews reference dogs, they are talking about different nations of people. Do you understand? Different nations. They're talking about Gentiles when they say dog. And I know that's a very derogatory term, but this is just the reality of the first century. This is how it was, how they spoke. Even Messiah, even up to and including the Messiah. use this terminology. So when he says it, it's recognized for what it is. He says, and notice he's talking to people who would be considered dogs. So he is actually making a separation between them who are of the family of faith and these people that are going around and doing different things. So what, and I got to get to this because I'm running out of battery here. It says, beware of evil workers, beware of the concision. That word concision, if you look it up, there are two words for the term circumcision. It's katatome and peritome in the Greek. And so, if I'm not mistaken, katatome means false circumcision or mutilation, and peritome means circumcision, right? True circumcision. So, who are the people of the false circumcision that are also known as dogs and evildoers? They're this group of people who Paul had to warn the Galatians about. They may be the same group, they may be a different group, but whoever they are falsely circumcising people because he says concision. This means false or mutilated circumcision, something that is mutilating of the flesh. Look at what he says next. Just to qualify this, you guys, it says, for we are the circumcision, which rejoice in Elohim in the spirit, and rejoice in Mashiach Yahushua, and have no confidence in the flesh. Again, do you see the wordplay there? Spirit versus the flesh. The spirit, the children of the promise versus the flesh, children of bondage. You're just talking Isaac and Hagar, Isaac and Ishmael again, right, as a coded language, because of course these people have to live side by side next to some of these people that aren't, on the up and up. And he doesn't want to go into disfavor or to be seen as a rebel or a renegade against, certain groups that are powerful. So he has to speak in code. He's to let people know why you reject this doctrine. Just go ahead and reject that bondwoman, but this is how. So it says, for we are the circumcision, rejoice in Elohim in the spirit, and rejoice in Mashiach Yahusha, and have no confidence in the flesh. Though I might also have confidence in the flesh, if any other man thinketh that he hath whereof he might trust in the flesh, I more. It says, circumcised on the 8th day, of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, and Hebrew of the Hebrews, as touching the law, a Pharisee. So this means that someone has come around and said, oh, I'm a Hebrew, or I'm an apostle, or I'm this, I'm that, and steered the Philippians in the wrong way. He says, beware of the false circumcision. And these people may come around boasting as to who they are. But if any man can boast about their flesh, I can do that more because I'm an actual Hebrew. I'm a Benjamite. I was actually raised a Pharisee. These other guys come around talking that smackety smack. Let them know that you've got a real one. And to combat that doctrine, if you have to, use because I'm a real Israelite. Don't let them tell you because they are this or that, that you have to listen to what they say. Do you see what I'm saying? We've already given you the instruction, and I, more than them, are, of the promise. Do you see what I'm saying? So that was a huge problem for the Philippians, for the Galatians, for the people of Smyrna, and for the Philadelphians. This is four groups of congregations. These are four congregations, all of which be warned against people that were claiming to be of the circumcision and were not. Got to be a big, huge problem in the first century of four congregations, all of them in Gentile territories, are having problems determining who to listen to. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's very, very important that you recognize this in the text because these false groups all had their own laws. They all had their own laws, and they were all called Torah. So when Paul is bouncing back and forth between works of the law and the law, all you who are seeking to be under the law, do you not hear the law? Doesn't that sound contradictory? Well, because he recognizes that these groups that are coming around will all have their own Torah. They'll all have their own interpretation of the text. Do you see what I'm saying? These are the things that you need to know about the text in order to interpret it. If you don't recognize that there were all these false Jewish people around in the first century giving the Galatians false law, then you won't recognize when he says, if you're circumcised from them, ye have fallen from favor. You don't let nobody mutilate you. Paul calls them the concision in the book of Philippians. That means that you can't be circumcised by people that are going to mutilate you. You can't. You can't be under, because they also say they wish to have you circumcised. Go back to Galatians. They wish to have you circumcised that they might boast in your flesh. Man, let's go back. Where does it say that in Galatians? They wish to have you circumcised so that they may boast in your flesh, is what it says. Is it in chapter 6? Let's see. All right. It's Galatians chapter 6 and verse 12. It said, let's start at verse 11. It says, ye see how large a letter I have written unto you with mine own hand. Paul don't usually do that. Paul usually gets somebody to write for him. It says, as many as desire to make a fair show in the flesh, they constrain you to be circumcised, only lest they should suffer the persecution for the cross of Messiah. It says, they want a fair show in your flesh. Do you see what I'm saying? It says, for neither they that themselves who are circumcised keep the law, but desire to have you circumcised, that they may glory in your flesh. Do you see what I'm saying? These are people who are bringing to you a false law and telling you to do something, forcing you to do something, constraining you to do something, when they themselves don't keep the law and they are of some wild stock anyway. Don't be circumcised from them people, because as soon as you do, you're beholden to all the things that they tell you to do. Any if comes back and he says, oh, I'm circumcised by Gamaliel and them. Oh, dang it. So now you're beholden to them. Now you're going to call them. I mean, you can't call it the first century. Now you're going to reach out to them for your instruction, and they're going to lead you against the Messiah. Do you see what I'm saying? They're going to lead you down this false path. You are not going to be able to get out of it because you are constrained and cursed by their law. You see what I'm saying? You are circumcised by them means you're cursed from Messiah because you've taken that false circumcision. Now you got to go to them for your law, right? You see what I'm saying? It says in Galatians chapter 5, this persuasion cometh not of him that calleth you. That means that they weren't believers in the Messiah. They weren't people who were, out there trying to, lead the Galatians in the right direction. Let's go to Romans chapter 9, you guys, so we can wrap this up. Romans chapter 9, just so you guys can get a real, that I'm not making this stuff up. This is what a huge problem is in the first century. These groups of people that were roaming around trying to get people to keep their laws. So this is Romans chapter 9, you guys. And I'm going to jump down to the verse. Let's go ahead and start from verse 1. We got to start from verse 1. It says, the truth in Messiah, I lie not. My conscience also bearing me witness in the spirit, that I have great heaviness and continual sorrow in my heart. For I wish that I myself were accursed from Messiah for my brethren, my men according to the flesh. He said he wished that he was accursed from Messiah for his brethren, because so many people didn't believe that it made him an outcast in his own community. He said, sometimes I wish I didn't have to do this because my brothers are out here and my brother's behind, and I feel bad about that. Sometimes I don't want to do this because my family, my people I'm missing my people. It says, who are Israelites, to whom pertaineth the adoption, the glory, and the covenants, and the giving of the law, and the service of Elohim, and the promise. He tells you right there that the law, the promises, all of those things, the adoption, all the things that we think of to be Christian understandings are all given to the Israelites. It says, who are the fathers, and of whom, as concerning the flesh, Messiah came. Overall, Elohim blessed forever. Amen. It tells you right there that Messiah came for the Israelites. It's that Messiah came for the world for sure, but he came for the Israelites so that through their salvation, that the entire world might know of Israel, know of the Elohim of Israel. That's why he says salvation is of the Jews, you guys. So it says, who are the fathers, and of whom, as concerning the flesh, that Messiah came, who is over all, Elohim blessed forever. Amen. It says, not as though the word of Elohim have taken none effect, for they are not all Israel, which are of Israel. People assume that means, oh, just because he's your brother don't mean, that he's got your back. Or, oh, you got to look at your blood too, because your blood can be out there, be snakes just like everybody else. Not everybody is who they appear to be. This is not what Paul is talking about. He's talking about people pretending to be Israel that aren't of Israel. Not everybody in Israel is from Jacob. Check this out, y'all. This is what he's saying in Romans. He's telling the Romans, yo, y'all watch out, because not everybody that are around here claiming to be Israel are actually Israel. So check this out. He says that it says, neither because they are the seed of Abraham are they all children, but in Isaac shall thy seed be called. And now that's an important statement, because he's saying that some people are claiming to say, I'm of the seed of Abraham. And that